When you hear the rev of a chainsaw, your brain immediately goes to one of three places. You're either thinking of a horror movie villain with a skincare routine consisting entirely of other people's faces, a burly man in flannel reclaiming his backyard from a stubborn oak, or your neighbor Dave, who has decided that 7 a.m. on a Sunday is the optimal time for topographical landscaping. See, we like to think of the chainsaw as the ultimate symbol of industrial power, man conquering nature with internal combustion and loud noises. But the chainsaw wasn't invented for lumberjacks. It wasn't invented for horror movies, and it definitely wasn't invented for Dave's hedges. The chainsaw was invented by doctors, specifically for childbirth. Before you check the URL, no, this isn't a creepypasta. This is a historical fact. In the 1780s, two Scottish surgeons looked at the miracle of birth and thought, you know what this situation needs? A bike chain with teeth. To understand why a chainsaw was considered best practice in a maternity ward, we have to acknowledge that 18th century medicine was essentially just organized guessing. Germ theory didn't exist. Anesthesia was just holding a wooden stick and praying to a god that clearly wasn't listening. Enter our protagonists, John Aitken and James Jeffray, two men who possessed that specific brand of Enlightenment-era confidence where you assume every problem can be solved with a more complicated piece of metal. The problem they were facing was the obstructed birth. If a baby was too large or the mother's pelvis too narrow, you had two options. Option A was a C-section, which in 1780 was less of a surgery and more of a pre-scheduled funeral due to infection. Option B was the symphysiotomy. This involved a doctor manually cutting through the cartilage and bone of the pubic joint to widen the exit. It was a strategy that historians now categorize as optimistic. The issue was that doing this with a standard knife was slow, messy, and, since the patient was fully conscious, exceptionally loud. Aitken and Jeffray decided they needed a tool that provided mechanical efficiency. Naturally, the solution wasn't find a way to make C-sections safer, it was make the bone-cutting part go faster. In 1785, they debuted the osteotome. It didn't have a gas engine, it was hand-cranked. Imagine a pocket-sized version of the chain on your mountain bike, but instead of shifting gears, the links were serrated teeth designed to chew through calcium. Obviously, the medical community loved it. It was precise, it was fast. It turned a 10-minute ordeal of manual sawing into a brisk 60-second renovation. As one does when they've invented a superior way to dismantle the human skeleton, the medical chainsaw design began to spread. It wasn't just for childbirth anymore. If you had a gangrenous leg that needed to go or a skull that needed a bit of ventilation, the medical chainsaw was the tool for the job. For nearly a century, this nightmare fidget spinner was a staple of the surgical kit. It was the disruptive tech of the Victorian era. Picture the scene. It's 1790. The air smells of lavender and unwashed wool. Dr. Jeffray arrives at a bedside not with a comforting word, but with a small brass-fitted device that looks like it belongs in a clockmaker's shop. He positions the device. The patient, who has likely already exhausted her capacity for screaming, watches as the doctor begins to turn a small handle. Gravity responded with feedback. The whir of the tiny chain fills the room, a sound that would eventually define the horror genre, but here it's the sound of modern progress. The teeth bite into the symphysis, the doctor is focused, rhythmic, turning the crank with the casual indifference of a man grinding coffee beans. Within seconds, the pelvic structure is relocated. The baby is delivered, the doctor wipes the osteotome on his sleeve, satisfied that he has implemented a strategy of peak efficiency. The mother survives, though her ability to walk normally in the future is now a secondary concern. The tool had done its job. It was a triumph of engineering over biology, a localized earthquake delivered by hand. Eventually, the medical world realized that perhaps there were better ways to handle childbirth than structural demolition. With the advent of anesthesia and sterile technique, the C-section became a viable alternative, and the hand-cranked chainsaw was retired to the back of the drawer. But humanity has a specific talent for looking at a terrifying tool and saying, I bet I could use that on a tree.
By the early 1900s, loggers realized that the same mechanics used to part bone could easily handle a Douglas fir. We essentially took a surgical instrument, gave it a V8, and told it to go fight nature. The tool didn't get more refined, it just got louder and more offended by the existence of forests. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? The next time you're watching a slasher flick and the killer revs up his chainsaw, just remember, historically speaking, he's just a very confused obstetrician. We live in a world where the chainsaw was invented before the stethoscope, the bicycle, and even the fax machine. We figured out how to mechanically dismantle ourselves long before we figured out how to listen to our own hearts. History is weird, it's gross, and it's remarkably consistent in its ability to make the wrong choice for the right reasons. I'm the guy your brain keeps confusing with a snack logo, and I'll see you next video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into the surgical origins of your garden tools, hit that like button. If you are currently reconsidering ever having children, hit subscribe.